From a visual standpoint, it has been a while since a game's backdrops have stopped me in my tracks, enticed me, quite like the Sicilian landscapes of Mafia The Old Country. The vineyards, the seaside ports, the forests, the ancient ruins, all of it bathed in that kind of haze that lets you really feel the heat on Protagonist Enzo's skin. The option to skip the many lengthy drives you will be forced to partake in is always right there, and in the 15 or so hours it took me to beat the game, I never once took it up on that offer. Such a joy as it was to merely inhabit such a gorgeous environment. It's interesting though, because for its beauty, it's not exactly a vibrant world per se. NPCs are gathered at specific points to move in specific ways to be interacted with only within the strict confines the game allows. Try to do so otherwise, and rather than punish you, the game greets you with something altogether more unsettling: complete and total indifference. It's as if you don't exist to the people around you, they're just ignoring you, trying to get on with their lives. The idea that a mafioso is causing havoc around them isn't a shock, and the best course of action is to just keep their heads down so as not to attract attention. In other words, it's not a living, breathing world you are inhabiting here. It's a postcard in motion, a painting to be experienced in its totality as it whirs by you. The kind of painting, in fact, and excuse both my limited art history knowledge as well as my woeful pronunciation of Italian, that one could potentially link to artistic movements and groups like the Macchiaioli, who not long prior to the period in which the game is initially set, sought to pursue a more honest, less restrictive artistic representation of the landscapes which they called home. An expression rooted in a desire to draw attention to what they saw as the political and social ills of their time, fighting what they saw as the overbearing influence of colonial powers. And looking at the old country of Mafia in this context, when you see someone like Enzo, someone who emerged from the horrors of the mining industry into which he was sold as a young boy, holding on to and fighting for the promise of escape to somewhere, anywhere else, like it was his entire raison d'etre, now breaking up unions and knife fighting a strike leader of one of those very same mines, it's hard not to feel like the game is making some kind of point here. In all areas of his life, Enzo is funneled down a certain path by powers out with his control. The world around him then, in the distance, isn't one to be taken by him. It's an expression of a world that's hard for Enzo to make sense of, to navigate. In a system ruled by long-established hierarchies of capital and wealth and power, whether in the mine or as a Teresi family enforcer, the best a person like Enzo can hope to achieve is to be an effective, quiet cog in some capitalistic machine. This is the tragedy at the heart of not just Old Country, but Mafia as a franchise, and it's one hammered home to players through its world design and how that influences the control a player has, the aspirations a player develops as a part of this world, a similarly effective cog in the game's larger story. It's also an approach to narrative and game design that has consistently, right up to this most recent release, confounded critics, because, well, this is not the way open world crime games are supposed to work. You know, back in the old days, it was the unfavourable comparisons to Grand Theft Auto or Just Cause that cemented Mafia, with its relative eye towards potentially restrictive verisimilitude, as a niche cult hit, where Rockstar's effort in allowing complete aspirational player freedom saw it more easily connect with a more mainstream audience. Nowadays, when every game is seemingly some form of open world, loosely influenced by the crime behemoth, where you tick off the checklist in order to gradually take over each area of a gargantuan map, it's perhaps easy to see why something like Old Country can feel so anachronistic to so many. You mean to tell me that you made a world this beautiful, this vast, and you just want me driving from end to end as part of some mundane commute? For me, on the other hand, to be challenged with such menial labour so early was a thrill, because it told me right off the bat that this was to be an experience more in line with one of my favourite games of all time, Mafia 2. A game whose environment is similarly dangled in front of you like a carrot as you climb the ladder of organised crime, only to find yourself stuck awkwardly in the middle, constantly looking over your shoulder. Where Vito was slinging cigarettes off the back of a truck Henry Hill style, Enzo is huffing boxes of wine onto it. Where Vito scrubs urinals in prison, one of Enzo's first objectives is literally shoveling shit. Vito inhabits the very city, the world, the opportunity that Enzo so desperately wants to escape to, and they're both labouring in exactly the same ways for exactly the same kind of paymasters under the same life-threatening, dehumanising conditions. It's hard to think of a more pointed critique of the American dream. And with that in mind, the idea that Old Country is a failure because it doesn't allow you the freedom to explore seems odd to me because, well, Enzo explicitly isn't free. He is dragged from place to place, forced to abide by strict rules in order to get fed or gain the slightest hint of respect. The game's world design simply asks the question, why should the player feel any different? Further, while most games of this ilk try to sell this vision of heightened immersion through things like realistic, dynamic weather, Old Country's strict narrative structure and presentation allows it to, perhaps ironically, think outside the box a bit. For example, colour palette changes instead to match tone rather than time of day. The once glowing, enrobing orange hues coating the horizon turn to a suffocating, dusty grey as tensions in the family mount. Here, the illusion of the open world is utilised as a tonal device. As that very illusion decays, as your hopes of making something of yourself dwindle, and even as so much blood is splattered across its resplendent canvas, so too does the colour erode from the world around you. And I keep coming back to this idea of the game world as a canvas upon which narrative can be crafted, separate from expectations of how this genre is supposed to function. For as much as the setting and characters and the targets of its satire are in flux between entries, the aim of the story being told in something like GTA remains entirely static. Climb the ladder, dominate your surroundings. That said, what are you, the player, really doing in a Grand Theft Auto game on a moment-to-moment basis? Whether it's in San Andreas or Vice City, from start to finish, you're driving from place to place, engaging in some shooting, before going to another place and engaging in some shooting. In between, I suppose you have the choice to go and do some extracurricular driving or shooting. The wanted meter goes up, you get stopped, and then things return to zero. Go to the next appointed place to do some more shooting. You know, for all that Mafia's deliberately restrictive world design, how consistent such design is with a narrative about the struggles of existing under oppressive systems of power, has set it apart as some niche title relative to Rockstar's dominant franchise, when thinking about Grand Theft Auto in this context, you might understandably begin to wonder which supposedly open world is really trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And it's for that reason that despite the consistent protestations of critics over the years, I hope we get more games like Mafia willing to subvert the notion that player freedom is the thing to chase above all else, not less. The world of Mafia The Old Country might be brutally restrictive, brutally violent, and ultimately illusory, but especially when our own world feels as hostile and unstable and as difficult to make sense of as it so often is, when it can feel like all we're trying to do is get through one more day, you know, at least the game is honest. Thanks so much for watching. A massive thanks as well to my patrons, who you can see on screen and are all getting access to exclusive, fully produced videos that aren't available here. Your continued support on patreon.com/writingongames is what allows me to keep going with the work I do on this channel, and I seriously cannot express how grateful I am for that. You are all the best. Special thanks go to Ewan Patterson, David Butkus, Brendan Hess, Mason Miller, Alex O'Sullivan, Michael Tritt, Rickety Cricket, Cameron Sinistros, Charles J. Liu, Oride, Thomas Ife, Luke Shaw, Alistair Dunn, Vitautis Catharsis, Dolly Bowman, Jon Condor, Danis Zakauskas, Christopher Faherty, Nicholas Villeneuve, Leah Chinello, Captain Knusprig, Bryce Snyder, Seapage Melt Limited, David Björk, Timothy Jones, Matthew Grover, Shardfire, Lynn Browning, Dallas Keane, Charlie Kimball, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.